to Plainview, you can watch your dog run away for 3 days if you go to Plainview. So I just thought I would make y'all aware of that if you've never had such an experience. So I realize on any given Sunday, it's someone's first Sunday here. Do you recall your first Sunday? And it may be that you are here because you first moved to Granbury. We hope that we can help you not only become acclimated to the church family here, but acclimated to the Granbury community as well. Or it could be you're here from Toledo visiting long-lost kinfolks. So if that's the case, we want to make you equally welcome. So let me just spend a moment bringing you up to speed where we are, since this could be your first Sunday. I am preaching through the Gospel of John. This is week 8. I began the first Sunday in January, and this will be a series of sermons that will span approximately 7 months, planning on finishing sometime in July. We're focusing on the theme, believe in me. Do we really believe in Jesus? And if we do, exactly what do we believe about Jesus? And the evidence for belief is overwhelming in the Gospel of John. And so that's why I specifically asked this morning as we began our worship time, what frame of mind are you in? Are you open and receptive and eager to learn, and more specifically to learn more about him? Last week we looked at the incident that's recorded in John chapter 7, verse 53 through John chapter 8, verse 11. The incident describes a woman who was caught in adultery, to use the language from the text. And there's a group of religious leaders that brought her before Jesus in an accusatory manner and said, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery, and the law provides that such a woman be stoned. We're talking about someone being executed is what they're making reference to. And of course, there was a provision in the Old Testament law for such actions. They obviously had no concern for her, no heart for this individual. As I noted last Sunday, she was simply a pawn in a very evil game in their efforts to trap Jesus in his words. As we think about their actions, I don't think they were giving any thought to their own ways. They were giving no consideration whatsoever to their own frame of mind, where their heart was. They were only thinking in terms of trapping Jesus and being accusatory toward this woman. No self-reflection, no self-awareness. We're never thinking about perhaps there was sin in their own life. And so the response of Jesus to these individuals in John 8 is, for those of you who are without sin, let that individual be the first one to throw a stone at this woman. And slowly but surely, one at a time, they began to disperse. And the only two people left in this interchange with Jesus facing this woman. And the last thing that he said to her is actually recorded in verse 11. Go now and leave your life of sin. Jesus had a heart for this woman, but he also inadvertently pointed out the lack of awareness and the spiritual blindness of those who brought this woman before Jesus in the accusatory way. In the very next verse, right after the interchange with this woman is completed, in the very next verse, in John 8, verse 12, it says, when Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the light of the world. I am the light. It's not like he represents light, he is the light. In other words, he is everything holy, pure, and good, and sinless. I am the light of the world. And so he follows that by saying, whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. In other words, they will have him. They will have the light of life in their lives. So it seems like a simple question, but I think it's a profound question. So what does it mean? What does it mean to walk in darkness? As I was thinking about this passage this week and preparing for our time together this morning, I asked myself that question. Okay, what does it mean to walk in darkness? And it occurred to me, I am not about to give you a preacher answer. Have y'all ever gotten a preacher answer? You know, preacher answer is one of those answers that sounds real spiritual and it sounds real deep, and you walk away and what was that all about? You have no inkling. So no preacher answers this morning. I think we deserve a real, authentic answer that actually makes sense. What does it mean to walk in darkness? So just a few thoughts here. I believe that it is a life that embraces evil doing. It's not that you have failed or that you have flaws in your life, you have fallen short, but instead you have consciously made a choice to embrace evil doing. It is an integral part of your very identity. You're going to embrace it. That's who you are choosing to be, and that is the equivalent to walking in darkness. But a second one is a mind that most definitely is not controlled by the Spirit. In the book of Romans, specifically in chapter 8, Paul contrasts the idea of a mind that's controlled by the Spirit versus a mind that's controlled by the flesh, or sometimes referred to as the sinful nature. And so if you are choosing to walk in darkness, your mind most definitely is not controlled or directed by the Spirit. Instead, it's a heart controlled by evil. It's not that you just, again, have failings in your life. We all have failings. But you're allowing your heart to be controlled and directed completely by evil. And more specifically, when we think of walking in darkness, it's very likely a life literally driven by bitterness and greed. That's not a life of walking in the light. Now, more specifically, in 1 John, not the Gospel of John, 1 John chapter 2, verses 9 through 11, he gives us some specific ideas as to what walking in darkness is like, because here's what he says. Anyone who claims to be in the light but hates a brother or sister is still in the darkness. Anyone who loves their brother and sister lives in the light, and there is nothing in them to make them stumble. But anyone who hates a brother or sister is in the darkness and walks around in the darkness. They do not know where they're going because the darkness has blinded them. So if you're living a life of hate, that your very life is not characterized by love for others, but your life is characterized by hate, you're so blinded by the darkness, you're doing nothing more than stumbling around. In John chapter 9, the first 34 verses, that's a lot, isn't it? 34 verses, actually 41 verses in John chapter 9. There's one of the most, I think, intriguing miracles in the Gospel of John. And it's a miracle in which there are several different reactions by various groups of people. I'm not going to read the whole text, but I do want to read just enough where you can get a good feel for what's going on in regard to this miracle. And where we're going to focus our attention this morning is on the reaction of a particular group of people to the miracle. So as I read John 9, and it is a fairly lengthy reading, I would encourage you to just pause for a moment and place yourself in the shoes or in the position of this individual who was born blind. So imagine, if you can, that you were born blind, have never had the opportunity to see anything. And all of a sudden you have the blessing of sight. Imagine you are that person as I read portions of John 9 this morning. Here we go. As he went along, referring to Jesus, as he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. As long as it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. Having said this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. I'm going to fast forward to verse 13 as we think about the reactions of various groups of people to this extraordinary healing. In verse 13, they brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now, the day in which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. Therefore, the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. He put mud in my eyes, the man replied, and I washed, and now I see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. But others asked, how can a sinner do such miraculous signs? So they were divided. Oh, this is not the last interchange the man has with the Pharisees. They summoned him a second time. And they told him, we know this man is a sinner, in reference to Jesus. And he replied, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. We've heard that referenced. Have you heard that passage quoted? A lot of you have. And frequently it's quoted really without an appreciation of the context in which it was stated. And so they asked him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And he answered, I told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to be his disciples too? Then they hurled insults at him and said, you are this fellow's disciples. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as far as this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from. The man answered, now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly man who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. To this they replied, you were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And they threw him out. Not exactly the anticipated response that you would think in terms of someone who has just witnessed a miracle. Chuck Swindoll says this, and I think it's very fitting. He says, where's the excitement? I mean, here's a man who was born blind. Where's the excitement? Where's the joy in the behalf of the man who's been miraculously healed? Wouldn't you think that would be the natural response? That there would be some excitement and some enthusiasm. Instead of leading him to a celebration, they dragged him to an inquisition, not only once, but twice. It becomes nothing more than an interrogation because they're not willing to give credibility to the actual facts. I want to ask you an odd question in a way, but I think it's one that we need to ask of ourselves. What do you think it would be like to be blind? And perhaps I should be more specific. What would it be like to be born blind? But I'm just going to ask in the most general sense, what would it be like to be blind? And I paused this week and I thought back to a very, very close friendship. I was very close to a man who's now deceased who had macular degeneration. It began in his late 20s. And his macular degeneration was so significant, if you were a person standing in front of him just 2 or 3 feet, he would be able to recognize that a form was there, that there was a person, but he would not be able to recognize who it was. Obviously could not drive. If he flew into an airport, he'd have to have somebody meet him at the gate. There were a lot of things I learned from him, so I just have a little list of things I learned from him. I learned from someone who's legally blind that he was very dependent on other people. I had the privilege of driving him around when we were together. He could have a driver's license, so I got the opportunity to drive him around, which was a great privilege. But I noticed, well, he has to have someone drive him. If he decides, I think I'll run down to the store and get a loaf of bread and a gallon of milk, he couldn't do that like I would normally do. If he's going to fly into an airport, there is no finding your way to baggage claim to go pick up your bag because you got to have somebody who actually guides you to pick up your bag and baggage claim. Very dependent. And secondly, he had to really give thought to his steps. And you know where I noticed that? It was going down a flight of stairs. I take it for granted. I just go down the flight of stairs, up and down. When I go visit Lake Greenberry Medical Center, I always take the steps. I go up and down, think nothing about it. And each step, he'd have to hold on to the railing and take it very slowly and try to estimate, approximate where the step was and be very, very cautious. So there's a lot of giving thought to your steps. Interpersonal communication was a challenge because, again, as I noted, you can, in a social situation, have this person walk up to you and you have no idea who that person is unless you can hear their voice. And so you've got to ask maybe someone standing next to you, who is that walking up to me? And finally, I noted, when someone is blind, the other senses are sharpened. You hear a little better. You sense things a little better. You smell more significantly because you make up for this legal state of blindness by sharpening the other senses. Let's hold that thought. Let's just pause and hold that thought in terms of what it must be like to experience blindness. And let's go back to John 9. The real reaction to a miracle, it launches the teachable moment for Jesus. So we fast forward to John 9, 35 through 41. So Jesus heard that they'd thrown him out, as we noted a moment ago. And when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And so this individual who is healed from his blindness responds, "Well, who is he, sir?" The man asked. "Tell me so that I might believe in him." Jesus said, "You have seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." Then the man said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshiped him. So Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world so that the blind will see and those who see will become blind." It is the teachable moment. I think we should repeat that. It's a little bit of a mouthful. I've come into this world so that the blind will see and those who see will become blind. Some Pharisees who were with him heard him say this and asked, What? Are we blind too?" And so Jesus said, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains." One of the things that's characteristic of the Gospel of John is that Jesus delights in double meanings. In Chris's curriculum that we use in our Bible class this morning, he says this: "To those who remain open and recognize how sin had truly blinded them, he gave spiritual understanding and insight, but he rejected those who had become complacent and self-satisfied because they were actually blinding themselves." So I wonder, when we show up on a Sunday morning to worship, it is a worship experience with the rest of the body of Christ. And I wonder when we come, are we coming realizing, I don't see everything. There's a lot I have yet to see. Or do we come with our arms crossed, with a scowl on our face, staring straight ahead in a spirit of complacency and self-satisfaction? And I wonder this morning what your frame of mind is, even at this very moment. Are you spiritually blind? So those who are inclined towards spiritual blindness, those who are spiritually blind, they don't think they're missing anything and therefore deny their need. Those who see are those who admit their need for spiritual sight. So whether it's a worship experience with the rest of the body of Christ on a Sunday, Or it's on Monday morning and you're getting up to begin your work week. What is your frame of mind? Your frame of mind, there are a lot of things I don't see. There are so many things I am yet to understand and appreciate. I have so much to learn yet, and I can grow in so many ways, and I could be benefited by the experience of other believers who can challenge and encourage me in so many different ways. So it takes a spirit of humility. If I think I know everything, there's a spirit of pride there. You can't tell me anything. I already know everything, but those who know they're blind are the ones to whom Jesus can give sight. So that spirit of humility, if you will, to get up, I know I'm blind. I know I'm blind to so many things. I sometimes use the word clueless. I realize that I'm clueless. I sometimes think of the word dense, too. I'm clueless and I'm dense, and therefore I long for Jesus to give me desperately needed spiritual sight. And then there's that sense of awareness, and I'm thinking about self-awareness. Those who are blind are the ones who don't realize their need. Again, think clueless, think a little naive and dense, but those who receive sight are the ones who sense their darkness. We know where our weak areas are, and we know the areas of our life where darkness prevails. We know those compartments of our life where we need to open those compartments up to Jesus and allow the light to literally shine in. Those dark closets in our hearts where the door is closed and sealed, and you're afraid to open that dark closet in your heart because you know how closets are. They get filled up with stuff. You open it up, things may fall out on top of you. And those closets are so dark, there is no light in there, and you want to open it up and allow that dark closet in your heart to be illuminated. And then there's that whole mindset of being somewhat self-satisfied. The self-satisfied, the religious know-it-alls believe they see, but they're blind. That is the individual who is not open and not receptive and do not have a teachable spirit. Instead, they are know-it-alls. Or as I had a student who immigrated here from Asia, he used to say, that person is just a know-it-all. And I still think about him, and he's a know-it-all. So there's those know-it-alls, the religious know-it-alls who believe they see, but in reality, they're actually blind. So I'm going to ask the question again. What does it mean to walk in darkness? And I hope just a little bit earlier I provided some insight into what it means to walk in darkness, and John even gives us some specific insight as we noted that text in 1 John chapter 2, verses 9 through 11, that hating a brother or sister, that is the equivalent of walking in darkness, and being inclined towards evil doing and having a mind that's not controlled by the Spirit. I believe all those things are fairly descriptive of walking in darkness. But as we think about spiritual blindness, let's come back and pose that question to ourselves one more time. So based on this potential state of spiritual blindness, what does it mean to walk in darkness? So what would it be like if I'm walking in darkness to actually recognize or to acknowledge spiritual blindness? And I believe, as Jesus notes in this passage in John 9, 35 through 41, in his interchange with the Pharisees, the problem was they did not acknowledge anything. They found themselves to be very self-satisfied, and yes, they already knew everything. So if I'm going to recognize my spiritual blindness, maybe it's sort of like someone who really is blind. And I'm thinking in terms of being physically blind. And I think back to my close friend who had macular degeneration and was legally blind. And so if we're going to acknowledge our spiritual blindness, maybe that means we acknowledge our dependence on others. And more specifically, we acknowledge our dependence on God. On our dependence on those whom we worship with to teach us, to encourage us, to spur us on towards greater depths of spiritual growth. And so we come to worship on a Sunday in the frame of mind. I'm not only here to give, but I'm kind of dependent. I'm dependent on all of you. I'm counting on you to be a source of encouragement. I'm counting on you to teach me something I didn't already know or remind me of something that I definitely need to hear again. And a way of acknowledging spiritual blindness is to give thought to your steps. And I'm not thinking about going downstairs. I'm thinking about spiritual steps, the steps of life. Am I being careful to acknowledge where I'm going and who I'm with and why I'm there? That we really are giving advanced thought to our steps. And intercommercial communication, even that changes. If I recognize that I'm spiritually blind, interpersonal communication changes because, I'm far more open to listening. Less inclined to talk and more inclined to listen. As James says in James 1:19, quick to listen, slow to speak. To recognize spiritual blindness means I'm going to listen to you. And the other senses really are sharpened because there's just a greater sense of openness in general. Not closed arms, not a scowl staring straight ahead, but instead open arms, open heart, willing to listen, willing to have meaningful conversations, willing to use all of your senses to recognize and to address spiritual blindness. At the end of the day, people with spiritual sight readily recognize their own sinfulness and their desperate need for a Savior. Matt's going to lead us in an invitation song this morning. And before he does that, I would like all of our shepherds, would y'all be willing to stand wherever you happen to be seated this morning so that everybody can look around and see where they are. As I've noted on previous weeks, these men are open and receptive, eager to listen and equally eager to be a source of encouragement. I get the privilege of working with them every single day, and I can attest to what fine people they are. So as you eagerly acknowledge this morning, as you say to yourself, I need Jesus. I'm in desperate need of a Savior, need a word of encouragement. We are here for you this morning. Now, let's all of us stand and let's sing that song, Invitation, this morning.